Welcome to the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast. Coming right up, fresh tips and insights from lodging professionals aimed at helping you improve your business. Our podcast is brought to you by the Frictionless Guest App, which helps improve your guest stay without adding more to your day. Learn how at frictionlessguest.com. Okay, welcome to the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast series. I'm Matt Langen, and once again, I'm joined by Steve Short, the founder and the CEO of the Frictionless Guest App. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Looking forward to getting this podcast out there, and I hope our listeners enjoy this one. This one's pretty interesting. It's a little different. It's with Darci Bartlett. She's the president of the Interim Innkeepers Network, which is a nonprofit that helps to place short and long-term temporary innkeepers at properties where the owners either need extra help or just really need to take time off.
This is cool because, and it's funny that this was not on our radar before, that we hadn't heard of Interim Innkeepers Network. It's a nonprofit, great concept, there to help innkeepers that maybe just need a weekend or two off, or maybe a month or 6 months or whatever. And I think Darci's I believe is the new president. And maybe that's, why we're hearing about it. I think maybe there's going to be more out there because she seems to be really active as far as trying to get the word out on this, because I think it's a great idea. And I think it can be really helpful to innkeepers that need a break or might have an emergency or something. It's difficult, I know, or at least certainly we know from hearing that, it's kind of difficult to be an innkeeper and the hours and all of that. So, I think it's a great idea. So.
Yeah, I do too. And unlike a traditional staffing firm, even if you want to call it this, Darci actually knows the business. She's also an innkeeper at the Spring Lighthouse B&B in Elk Rapids, Michigan. So she is an innkeeper herself, which I think kind of strengthens her offering out there too.
Yeah, I think she did the interim thing for quite a while. And then I think the new gig is at a startup, a new B&B. I think maybe she knew the owner or something. I'm not sure, but I think she's been there for about a year. So she's been doing it as an interim innkeeper for a while. And now, I don't know how permanent, but it's been the longest gig I think that she's had. So yeah, she's definitely knows what the challenges are of an innkeeper firsthand. Yeah. So
yeah, she does. Any last minute takes before we kick it over to the actual interview?
Just say, look into these folks. If you're an innkeeper listening, look into them. And like I said, it's a nonprofit, so it's all about helping innkeepers out. And that's a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
It's definitely a win-win. And we hope you all enjoyed this episode of the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast with Darci Bartlett, president of the Interim Innkeepers Network. And Darci and Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to be here. Steve, how you doing?
Doing well, Matt, as usual. Thanks, Darci, for being here. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Darci. And let's go ahead and kick it off. If you don't mind, tell us all about the Interim Innkeepers Network, its services, how long you all have been around, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. We are a nonprofit 501c group of about 45 innkeepers, couples and singles, that are willing to step in when an innkeeper needs to step away. We have set this up in a listing service sort of way, so there's really no money involved for us, or our hands are not in the middle, but we offer that service. You can post a job and we'll find someone to fill it.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that background there. And also, I understand you are also an innkeeper yourself at the Spring Lighthouse B&B in Elk Rapids, Michigan. So you wear multiple hats, right?
I do wear multiple hats. And yes, I was an interim for about 5 years, my husband and I. And then we took this job as a full-time position. You find that happens sometimes in this industry of interim innkeeping. And we took this job. So now I work as an innkeeper full-time, interim innkeeper part-time, president and on the board with the other ladies and gentlemen that are working with me. We keep ourselves busy.
And the interim innkeepers been around for almost 20 years, right? It's been a while.
Exactly. It's been 17 years that we've been doing this as a group. And I still think that we need to make some headway on letting people know we're out here. But nonetheless, it's a great service. It really works well for those who need to get away or those innkeepers who have had an illness or an innkeeper that they've hired to run their property that has an illness. It's great to be able to just call on someone and say, can you come and help us out for a week, 2 weeks, 6 months, whatever it may be.
Yeah, we've had podcasts with consultants and various folks in the industry, in independent innkeeping industry, and they've mentioned this concept. I've heard it at least once or twice of getting a temporary interim innkeeper, but I didn't know you all existed until we heard from you, which was great. And so it seems to me, especially as a nonprofit, I mean, at first my assumption was, wow, I thought it was a great idea no matter what, but I assumed that it was a for-profit type organization. And it seems like there's definitely a need out there. But the fact that you're nonprofit, I mean, it's a benefit for everybody. So, I mean, I think it's really important for listeners of our podcast that are at least innkeepers or aspiring innkeepers to be aware that you're around, and maybe if you could talk about kind of how it works. I mean, I guess first off, if I'm an innkeeper, I'm thinking, wow, we haven't had a vacation in, well, if you're an innkeeper, it could be many years, right? A real vacation. So, thinking, okay, we might take a couple weeks off. Where would I start to say, okay, this is my livelihood. It's my heart and my soul. I'm not going to risk messing this up for anything. I really have to trust the person or people who would come in on the interim. So where would I start other than obviously going to your website, and then how would I find my match?
Absolutely. That's a great question. The website itself has different options. You can search for your own interim, looking for someone local, looking for someone who's willing to travel. That's up to you and them. You can search for through our groups. There's profiles on each and every one of our interim innkeepers. They talk about how they came to this and how much experience they have and how many different properties they've worked for, things like that. If that is more daunting than you'd care to do, you can also go to one of the tabs that is for posting an assignment. And you can put in there what you're looking for, how big your property is, how long you're going to be gone, what extra services such as pet care, or you don't have cleaners, so the interim will be cleaning. You can put all that in, and then it goes out to our board. Every member gets that particular post, and they will contact you via phone or email, whichever you prefer. And they'll discuss with you what their requirements would be and what their abilities are, what particular software they're familiar with, which tends to be most. All of our interims tend to be pretty well versed on reservation systems, Airbnb, VRBO, etc. So you discuss all of these things. And because each one of our interims is an independent contractor, the rates vary according to the innkeeper. So you may want to interview 3 or 4 or 5 and find the right fit. We are really just a listing service, so there's really nothing of monetary note for us, but it is nice to be able to offer that. So there is one spot you can find someone.
But you do some vetting, or you do have some sort of requirements or whatever, minimum requirements for the folks that you allow to join the network as interim innkeepers. Is that right?
That is very correct. We do a vetting process. It is in our bylaws. We do require, if they do mostly short-term or have done mostly short-term interims, we require 5 or 6 different inns for a certain amount of time. If they've done longer seasonal interim innkeeping, we require 2 or 3 of those for a season, and to know that they've done this business before. We often have owners of former B&Bs. They sold and they wanted to get out of the 7-day-a-week all the time B&B grind, if you will, and get into something but that's still in that venue, because that's what we love and what we're a part of. So we often have a lot of innkeepers, or interims, who have been innkeepers.
Mm-hmm. And what if I'm listening and I was an innkeeper, or maybe I'm thinking of retiring but wanting to do this, or whatever whatever thing is changing in my life? What's the cost for the interim innkeeper to join?
The costs change as time goes along, but I believe right now they're $175 a year, which allows for advertisement, booths at different conferences, things that we do that way, the keeping up of the website and any of the advertisements we do on social media.
Okay. And didn't ask, so I know you've been around for 17 years, and I know you were an interim for about 5 or so. How long have you been with the organization, and how long have you been president?
I was just made president this year, so the beginning of the year, but I have been their social media marketer and admin or techie admin for a couple of years and been with them myself for almost 6 years now. It's a great little group of people, just wonderful.
So that explains why we heard from you, because you've taken over. You're like, okay, let's get the word out, right?
Absolutely. Going to hit the ground on it.
And since you have a background in social media and all these things, you realize the importance of, well, podcasts and all of that stuff, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Hoping to reach the younger generations, hoping we see a lot more of that coming into the innkeeping industry.
It's necessary, whether it's innkeepers or guests, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
The world has to keep rolling along and evolving, so that's for sure. So talk about the kinds of gigs that innkeepers, the interim innkeepers, might have. I mean, it sounds like it could be anything, but maybe there's a more common thread of how they're being used, or, like most of the time it's, a weekend or a week, or that's it. Or are there a lot of long-term gigs? I'm just kind of curious how these, again, I'm sure it just the whole spectrum, but, maybe you can just talk about how common these gigs are and what they're like.
Sure, absolutely. And they really do run the gamut. That's the truth. But the majority are going to be on the ends of that spectrum. You're either going to have someone who needs an innkeeper for a week, maybe 2 weeks, or you're going to have someone who needs an innkeeper for the entire season. Those tend to be the more common gigs like that. Sometimes it's a few days. Sometimes it's even I'm working by myself and my inn is really, really loaded with people and we do wedding venues or whatever, and I need extra hands on the ground. I need extra people with me here. So it is very varied, but the general gist of it is a week or two at a time. Our innkeepers most of them will travel just about anywhere in the country, and if they have their visa, they will travel outside of the country. So it can be very interesting work. But the general gist of it is a week to 2 or the entire season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be cool to be able to travel all over. Pretty neat. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What about other, like, non-innkeeper jobs that are necessary? Because you talked about seasonal or just overload or whatever. So I might not want an innkeeper, but I might need service type help or whatever. And definitely seasonal places. We've got clients that use our app that are seasonal. I'm thinking of like Bar Harbor, Maine, for example. They shut down over the wintertime, so their help has to be seasonal. So do you allow for that, or is that something you're thinking of doing as part, because it's a service to innkeepers? It seems like there's a need. If you could, again, I guess part of the challenge there is the vetting of people, but it seems like you'd be a good source of where innkeepers could go, not just for interim innkeepers, but for interim help.
Oh, that's a fantastic idea, and not one that we've really touched on, but I would love to talk with our board about that and see if we couldn't expand to something like that, because we get a lot of that. We get a lot of seasonal. As a matter of fact, my husband and I started as seasonal innkeepers in Maine. And, we actually loved coming home and having the winter where we could just detox from a really heavy, summer season. But yeah, to find other forms of help for that. And, some of our interims might even be interested in those positions because they're not, they just want to have the ability to get out and do a little bit of work it's hard to say what, we all make our own rules sort of when it comes to what we'll do. But yeah, that's interesting. A great thought.
Every once in a while, I come up with some good ones, but it doesn't happen very often.
Oh, I doubt.
Matt, mark that down on the calendar.
I have marked it. Yes, duly.
Okay, let's see. So, Matt, have I gone askew here, or do you need to reel me back in, or what?
No, you're doing fine. I just wanted to throw in just the question to Darci to see how things have been going since the COVID-19 pandemic. Since goodness, we're almost at a full year with this now. And Darci, as we mentioned, we've been doing a series of articles with other innkeepers to see how they are doing, or they have been doing during the pandemic. And one of the trends that we saw was a lot of properties based in rural areas tended to do better than properties in major cities, which makes sense because a lot of people flee the cities for the countryside. And just wanted to see if you've been seeing that trend with your clients and just, your take overall with where things are with the pandemic.
Oh, absolutely. Speaking from an innkeeper stand, definitely we're rural, we're in northern Michigan, and we have been busier than we ever expected to be. We get Chicago clients, we get Detroit clients, we get, that kind of thing on a regular basis. It's been crazy busy for us. And I think the stay safe, stay small mantra that's been a big popular thing for B&Bs this year is really working. People are really working towards doing that and getting away, but not to a hotel. As the interims go, I think it's been a little bit of a challenge to keep themselves as busy as they'd like to be, because I think some people have shut down B&Bs simply because of fear of the pandemic, and the rural ones may not be large enough to use us as often as we'd like them to. But I think this coming year, we're going to find that those of us who are working through the pandemic are tired. We're ready for a break. So we're expecting to be very, very busy this year as interim innkeepers.
Yeah, I think everybody needs a vacation once the vaccines are rolled out and we get some sort of sense of normalcy. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I meant to ask, you said that everybody has different rates or whatever, it's up to the interim innkeeper. But if I'm an innkeeper listening saying, wow, we need to take that vacation or whatever, can you give us some, ballpark numbers, what it typically costs to get an interim innkeeper?
Absolutely. And I give this information also to my innkeepers, that the new interims that are joining, because they have no idea what to charge or what the going rate tends to be. I can give you a very general ballpark. Again, each interim does a different, it may depend on the number of rooms. It may depend on what's involved for what we have to, again, pet service or weddings or whatever. The general gist of this is right around $200 a day. It will vary up and down from there, but that's a pretty good margin of what you're going to look at to get away.
Okay. And other expenses, travel expenses?
Travel expenses, absolutely. If an interim is driving, generally, again, they would charge you somewhere in the vicinity of what the IRS allows for mileage to and from. If it is a flight situation, they will, charge you for the flight and possible car rental if they need to. But again, if you're, most B&Bs or boutique hotels, that is a night or two max, a room or two night, I should say, is what that would cost them. And it's worth it to not be closed.
Yeah. But all of those things are negotiable. There's not, so the Interim Innkeepers Network does not have, set, even though you're not getting involved in the transaction, you're not saying, okay, if you're going to use an interim innkeeper, here's what it's going to, all of these things, like X amount for mileage. You don't set that out. It's totally between the interim innkeeper and the innkeeper that needs them.
It is totally set up that way. And the interims are very flexible. It's surprising. We've had Hawaii boutiques and B&Bs that could not afford to pay that kind of, $1,000 per ticket And the innkeepers went early and spent an extra week there on their, as a vacation. That made them happy. It's very different, very negotiable that way. Mileage, if I have to drive an hour or two, I may not even charge. It just depends on the situation. So they make that as they go.
And there's probably a fair amount of recurring gigs or, innkeepers that have done their thing as an interim and they're asked back because they know the ropes, right? And the owning innkeepers are comfortable with them, right?
Absolutely. You see that often. You'll get interims who have 5 or 6 B&Bs that they go from this one to that one, and that's pretty much all they do. They almost just stop engaging a lot with the Interim Innkeeper Network because they're full. They've already gotten, 4 or 5 people who take them regularly. So, but it's just a great way to get people put together. And when that particular interim is not available, they'll reach back into the Interim Innkeeper pool and find someone else.
So it's not unusual to have, you've probably got innkeepers interims that have done 100 gigs or more. Probably,
absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. All over the country, all kinds of different places. The vast amount of experience in our pool is just unbelievable. It's just crazy what these people have done and the knowledge that they have. Mm-hmm. So when they're interviewed, I think the innkeepers would be very comfortable saying, wow, this person has been all over the country. They have a good idea of what they're doing.
And is the mindset that it's totally up to the interim innkeeper, but is the mindset, hey, we got to be ready to go when we're needed? And, so if an innkeeper is listening saying, well, I need somebody next week or whatever, it wouldn't be unusual or difficult to have somebody who's immediately ready.
Not at all. No, not at all. When those jobs come in, whether someone were to get a hold of us through the contact situation or posting a job, we as interims often reach out to each other and say, hey, how can we do this? We may have a seasonal situation come up. They need someone for 3 months, and the people who are available for maybe 2 or 3 weeks at a time. We will often try to line up 5 or 6 interims who can come and go and keep that business going for the innkeepers. So it's a really great network that way. We have a lot of people who do that particular thing. They follow each other to help fill a longer term. Absolutely.
Okay. Cool. Excellent.
Yeah.
Matt, what have we not covered?
Yeah, I think we've covered pretty much everything. And Darci, typically at this point in the podcast, I ask if there's anything else to add. But before I ask that, is there anything else to add before I ask if there's anything else to add?
Something came and went. It wasn't a big deal. But no, I just had one other thing to add when you asked me if I have something.
All right, perfect. We'll do that then. Awesome. All right, well, Darci, really appreciate your time today. Lots of great insights you shared, and what an awesome service that you have here. And again, thank you so much for reaching out to us to do this podcast. Steve and I were really excited to talk with you and get your take, because this is a neat service that we'd never really heard of before in this industry. And before we sign off today, Darci, is there anything else to add?
Yes. And first, I'd like to say thank you to you, because we appreciate that greatly. We really want to get our name out there and let people know that there is help. You don't need to be overwhelmed and burned out. We want to help. The thing that I'd like to add is that we are always looking to expand the Interim Innkeepers Network. So if you are in a position where you were or are about to sell an inn, or you're looking to get into this particular industry through interim, please don't hesitate to call. Go to our website, fill out the join application, and we'll get back to you and talk you through how to become an interim.
Awesome. Yeah.
All right.
And there's, I don't think there's no downside to any of this. I mean, it's like I said, it's great. It's great that you all exist, and it's helpful to those who are looking for the temporary gigs, and it's an incredible help, I think, to the ones who need it. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Cool. All right.
Alrighty.
All right, perfect. Well, I will take us out then. And our guest for this episode of the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast series was Darci Bartlett, who's the president of the Interim Innkeepers Network, which is a nonprofit that helps to place short and long-term temporary innkeepers at properties where the owners need to take some time off. And we really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast, brought to you by the Frictionless Guest App. If you wish to learn more, please visit frictionlessguest.com. Once again, that's frictionlessguest.com. And Darci and Steve, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darci. We appreciate it. Thanks, Matt.